Um, so as Valentina Re pointed out in her presentation, nowadays we are experiencing a transitional moment defined by the turn from linear television to internet television caused by the expansion of video-on-demand services. Television seriality is therefore forced to reinvent itself, creating new forms and formats able to be transferred on online platforms and separated from the early notion of flow. Among other industrial practices, one interesting response to the uncertainties brought by the recent introduction of new business models in television is the proliferation of revivals, as forms of storytelling based on the rehabilitation of a pre-existing narrative ecosystem. In particular, recent examples of television revivals differentiate themselves from products such as adaptations, reboots, and remakes. While they share the idea of a deep intertextuality, TV revivals position themselves more on the side of retakes, sequels, prequels, and spin-offs, where the idea of continuity, moving backward, forward, and or transversally from the source text, is central. Being repetition one of the basic modalities of intertextuality, at the same time, continuity has become more and more the fundamental feature of seriality, often replacing repetition in the fictional world building. We therefore find TV revivals at a crossroad between intertextuality and seriality, where both practices of repetition and expansions are included in the narrative structure. Following Eco's classification of the typology of media repetition, we can say that TV revivals function both like retakes as ways to, and I quote, recycle the characters of a previously successful story in order to exploit them by telling what happened to them after the end of their first adventure, end of quote, and like serials, as textual occurrences with the shift in storylines aiming to postpone the ending and expand the narrative universe. If the notion of revival helps us on one hand to outline a set of textual strategies which define its role in media franchises, it also determines an historical relevance connected to industrial practices and commercial interests. Notably, the context of internet television and video-on-demand platforms, where all media dynamics are changing toward a flexible model in which the audience gains more power and freedom in selecting its media diet, enhance a new interest for all television products. The aim is to gather all audiences and earn more viewers through what Lizardi calls mediated nostalgia. In fact, despite their exponential growth, video-on-demand platforms are going through a phase of assessment. The new business models introduced by platforms like Netflix and Amazon still need to be monitored and constantly adapted to different cultural environments and industrial conditions. So in the precarious context of digital television, revivals are a good solution to assure, within a certain limit, profitable revenues based on the previous reputation of a show already tested. Adopting the definition given by Konstantin Varevis when he examines the characteristics of remakes, revivals can be listed as, and I quote, commercial products that repeat successful formulas in order to minimize risk and secure profits in the marketplace, end of quote. It is the case, for instance, of Arrested Development, with 15 episodes produced by Netflix in 2013, or the successful revival of 24, the 12-episode limited run series, 24 Live Another Day, brought back in 2014 by Fox, which signed a deal for digital rights with Amazon. So these revivals were followed by many other examples, such as Heroes Reborn, the X-Files TV series, Gilmore Girls, A Year in the Life, Fuller House, and the upcoming third season of Twin Peaks. Even though built-in fan bases and known storylines do not guarantee a complete success, they still provide an audience participation floor that is likely easier for economic stakeholders to financially support. In fact, if we look back at their appearances in the history of television, we observe that TV revivals became more and more frequent starting from the 80s, a period that marks the beginning of another alignment phase, named by Amanda Lott's multi-channel transition. What the multi-channel transition and the current post-network era have in common is notably the attempt of changing the old television industry structure by providing the audience with a wider array of content. The audience-oriented nature of the revival higher the chances of providing profits by creating an economically safe place for production. Moreover, as vested financial interests are eager to understand new platforms, TV series creators are allowed to venture through different storylines and expand the fictional universe with regard for the platform for which the content is produced. Television revivals should be therefore studied as experimental narrative spaces to reinvent pre-existing narrative forms and to adapt them to the contemporary mediascape. What is particularly interesting about this type of textual form from an academic's perspective is ultimately the possibility of analyzing it within the franchise as part of a corpus of text connected by a dense intertextuality. So we can examine it both from a semiotic perspective in terms of horizontal development of different storylines and from an historical perspective in terms of format evolution, meaning format as the recursive shape of a television show defined by temporal limits. Taking as a theoretical framework what we discussed so far, the nature of revival is so that they can create a potentially infinite process of serialization through repetition and variations. By doing this, they add further value to the narrative repository, not only impacting the final commercial result, but also broadening and reinventing the narrative space. Besides serving as financial triggers, TV revivals are used nowadays as narrative places for updating the fictional universe, giving it a renewed format shape. So to examine the latest diffusion of this practice and get a glimpse on how TV forms and formats change in the current scenario, I will observe as a case study the format evolution of the X-Files. The X-Files franchise covers a period spanning from the first season, aired on Fox in 1993, up until the limited run 10th season, released in 2016. By depicting the transformation of the X-Files narrative capital over the years, we can measure the impact of technological developments on the format structure of the series created by Chris Carter. I will consider text within the same semiotic register, notably focusing on the last appearance. So, listed in chronological order, the X-Files season 1 to 9, the mythology-based feature film The X-Files Fight the Future, a second feature film The X-Files I Want to Believe, and finally, The X-Files The Event Series. With its polycentric structure, which combines repetition, continuity, and multiplicity around two main narrative patterns, the X-Files, and I quote from Short, pioneered a format that rewarded regular viewing via developing mythology, while self-contained episodes encouraged casual viewers. So its status of semi-serialized show makes the X-Files a preferential case to study the evolution of different narrative forms and norms. One of these forms is characterized by an episodic rhythm, with Monster of the Week stories, and another is driven by an overarching plot developed through the so-called mid-arc episodes, which create a narrative complexity typical of the latest phase of television seriality. This structure allowed the birth of a meta-narrative discourse based on the similarity and differences between a given hypotext and its hypertext, using Jeanette's terminology. The apparently hierarchic nature of franchises falls here into a multi-axis narrative able to enhance, thanks also to its repetitive forensic formula, both a linear and a non-linear offbeat fruition, which perfectly fits the current scenario of media consumption. So how does the event series insert itself in the X-Files franchise? Functioning as an interpretative framework of the original narrative, the X-Files The Event series adopts the government conspiracy plot in the first and the last episode in order to align itself with the rest of the franchise. At the same time, it uses the episodic structure to update recurring themes. Overall, this revival doesn't really try to be a sequel with the intent of creating a narrative closure. Instead, it aims to reactivate the fictional ecosystem and explore new possibilities for the adaptation of both the overarching story and the procedural stories to a different television culture and television market. The main challenge of this event series, as well as of other examples of TV revivals, is to maintain the coexistence of the episodic micronarratives and the seasonal macronarrative, while responding to different production, distribution, and consumption practices from those of the 90s. So in the case of the X-Files franchise, this difference is evident. Year 1993, when the first season originally premiered on Fox, was marked by old television industry dynamics, which influenced the series over the course of its 9-season run. And we can see them here. So the X-Files witnessed the advent of the cable television, the end of the fencing rules, the introduction, of DVD, and the birth of the first internet fandoms. Fitting the full schedule and airing in the 9 p.m. slot in the US, the over 20 episode length structure was still subordinated to an old programming model, and also to fragmented release among different countries and to the notion of flow. In 2016, Fox evolves, and it distributed the event series adopting a date launch model across 80 countries, with a special 2-night premiere in the wake of its status of internationally acclaimed popular culture hit. The whole series was made available also through time shift viewing and online viewing, following a multi-screen delivery model. So these changes in television forced the creators to experiment new options narratologically and televisually. Serving at a first glance as a tribute to a cult TV series, the X-Files event series brings back to the audience part of the narrative and discursive tropes of the previous seasons, while adding strategic variations typical of the retake formula. However, in the analysis of the format, what becomes central is the temporal and formal structure in which story elements are ordered, beyond their specific function in the text. So as to the way in which the X-Files narrative material is distributed throughout the season, one evident shift from the previous seasons is the 6-episode structure, which replaces the over 20-episode structure traditionally used to divide the story. The change in the format traces a sharp limit between the event series and the format adopted in season 1 to 9. And each episode skips the 45-minute long format, as it tries to condense within itself both the intertextual necessity typical of the revival and the intent overstating the mythology. While it certainly expands the narrative ecosystem by bringing Mulder and Scully back together and reopening the X-Files cases, and of course with the entire franchise, it condenses the plot in a shorter format, isolated by previous appearances. So this choice and the role of format are connected to a far wider tendency. Both a form of branding and a cultural revival, the X-Files event series represents a way to adapt to a major trend in contemporary television seriality, characterized by the contraction of the season's length in favor of the dilatation of the narrative arc outside its episodic limit. In fact, a shorter format responds to specific production, distribution, and consumption needs. On one end, it gives a valuable option for bringing already successful actors and screenwriters on a TV show. On the other hand, it allows the content to travel throughout different media platforms, while also giving the viewer the possibility of personalizing the consumption experience in a more manageable way. Additionally, the event series defines a new point of access to the X-Files story, from which the viewer can go back or forward thanks to its brief structure, able to welcome new fans and stimulate their curiosity. From what we observe, In the new context of internet television, short narratives in the forms of revival serves as hubs in complex networks. They let the viewer enter a much wider media ecosystem previously established through a web of intertextual references which connect the entire franchise. Especially when it comes to complex franchises with a consolidated audience, TV revivals such as the X-Files TV series are therefore ways of facing and challenging all television standardized formats. As cultural products, revivals find themselves at a turning point between the past and the future, both inheriting an audiovisual tradition and aiming to create new processes and inputs for storytelling. Being strictly connected to previous textual occurrences, they shouldn't necessarily be referred to as mere nostalgic manifestation. Instead, what makes them interesting in the analysis of serial form is the possibility to raise up questions about the story from its original appearance throughout its evolution. So finally, how are serialized narrative forms transforming into a new shape in response to changes in the mediascape? From this analysis, two main interrelated phenomena emerge as part of the contemporary television scenario in its complexity. On one hand, the spread of TV revivals as narrative forms themselves with their own commercial norms, and on the other hand, the shortening of the season's length. So we notably observed that a first phase in the diffusion of TV revivals sparked the rebirth of a large number of TV series between 1980 and 1995, some of them already adopting a shorter format, and a new wave of TV revivals started in the second decade of the 21st century with even shorter formats. And if we compare them to their antecedent, dating back to the multi-channel transition, the most recent examples of TV revivals appear to be useful not only to make a show's previous work profitable again, with all fans and newcomers rewatching the original season through reruns, but they also help networks to sign streaming deals with over-the-top platforms like Netflix, Amazon, and Hulu, filling the gap between linear television and digital television and capitalizing networks' content on libraries online. So to conclude, the format configuration in the X-Files media franchise provides a specific case study for this phenomena. However, what I tried to bring to the academic attention with this presentation is the existence of a broader tendency in contemporary television, which is worth investigating as part of the ways how digital technology and with virtual platforms have affected and are still affecting the construction of narrative forms. Thank you.
Grazie, Giulia. Thank you very much. So we have around 10 minutes for interaction, doubt, en français, in italiano, in English, Spanish if you really need.
Okay.
Is the anthology form, Giulia, connected in some way with the other topic that you already studied? No, I mean the revival form, connected with the other form, the anthology form that you already studied. I mean, for me, the link is evident, but do you work with these correspondence?
Yeah, I would say so.
Mm-hmm.
So considering the shorter formats, mm-hmm. It's the same. I would say it's responding to the same dynamic. Mm. So a shorter format allows the content to travel online and allows the viewer to manage his consumption experience more like in an easier way. So I would say the link is evident, as you said.
And apart vous aviez une question? No. And apart the revival forms, there is other kind of forms and format today that are connected with the old anthology strategy that it was, I mean, the central one in the US television around 50s and 60s.
Yeah, I would say event series and what is now called limit and run series,
Okay.
and all
I
these
see.
forms of shorter formats. One other format is the miniseries, which was already used even in all old eras of television. So.
Encore une intervention. Monsieur Pape.
Thank you for the presentation. I was wondering whether these revivals you presented also speak to certain kinds of publics. The question of the public was sort of marginal in your presentation, but it seems to me, for instance, that it has to do with cult TV shows that have that have a particular kind of very committed audience. Does that factor into the kinds of revivals that we see a lot, or is that just one of many different kinds of strategies for revivals?
No, I would say it's central. Maybe I didn't mark it as central, but I talked about it as part of the ways in which they are exploited in an economical way. So bringing back these cult TV series, it's actually a decision made based on economical options of exploiting an old audience, old viewers that are coming back to the same kind of product.
If I may just follow up quickly, but there seems to be a difference, for instance, between the X-Files on the one hand, which has like the strong cult following, and Fuller House, I would say, which does not really have a cult following or a really committed. It does, would you say? But there it seems to be appeal to a more general sense of nostalgia. So I'm wondering about the different kinds of strategies that might sort of tie older audiences back in, whether we can sort of find different strategies there.
Of course. So I didn't analyze it in this case, but I think there's a difference. Notably, if we talk about comedies or dramas, so there's a big difference for sure if we talk about the sci-fi fandom of X-Files or the Fuller House fandom, which might be big, but not the same kind of audience, of course. So it's worth investigating more in this sense.
Autre intervention? Valentina Re.
Thank you very much. Well, it's a very, very small question. I was thinking about recent series like Designated Survivor with Kiefer Sutherland, who plays a kind of anti-hero who anyway has something similar to the well-known Jack Bauer in 24, or series like The Fall with Gillian Anderson, who plays Stella, who is a detective who has something in common maybe with the main character of X-Files. So do you think that this kind of series can be considered as, I don't know, a sort of indirect revivals that takes advantage of some nostalgia and fandom?
Yeah, I would say so. Maybe in a different way. So I chose in particular these kind of revivals because they were strictly connected to the same narrative and you can understand the change in the format. But for sure, that's also a form of revival.
Merci. Last one, quick.
Okay, maybe a really quick, maybe even suggestion. I don't know if you are familiar with the notion of cycles. It comes more from film theory.
Sorry, no, sure.
Cycles.
Okay.
Media cycles. Amanda Ann Klein wrote a book about film cycles. I have a wonderful graduate student, Matt Smith, in Georgia State, who is now doing a transmedia. He takes the idea of the film cycle. He writes about ghost hunting shows, and he kind of connects across different medias, from, and you will excuse me because this is his fandom and not mine. So, the found footage horror film, and then all of the cycles of endless ghost hunting shows. And so to take that notion of a cycle, I definitely with X-Files, I'm wondering if there's another cycle present, and he treats it very economically, right? It's an exploit. We'll do another one and another one because the audience is there. if that plays into the revel. And another question, and this is for later for you to think. You say it's a format, but do all these different shows follow one? You know, what would you define as format here? Is this the length, the unit of time? So that's a big question for, I'm sure, a lot of us.
Talking about the shape of the TV series, and in particular I was referring to the episodic structure as opposed to a more a broader narrative structure which goes beyond the episodic limit, and that's something that we see recently in lots of TV series. So I wanted to point it out that. And as for the question about the cycles, I don't know if I quite understood what you were asking.
Again.
It's a film theory. It's very, very established film theory. The idea of the cycles. It kind of corresponds with genre, but it's even more economic, and industrial based. So this is just a suggestion. This is a new kind of conversation that I'm familiar with. So, and I thought it could be, the idea is that then there is something in the culture that's really driving interest, and what is the repetition cycle that allows to exploit. But
to explain more,
Mais je crois que c'est justement un de ces points qui peuvent croiser les interventions sur la serialité. Cycle and seriality is connected, so we can have some discussion later. For now, thank you, Giulia.
Thank you.